Hey, everybody, welcome back to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brook and Charlie Jewett. We are on episode 55. And Brooke, today we're going to talk about your three rules, breaking down the sequence of the three rules. Now, in real estate, we've talked about this. The three rules are location, 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 right? In your world, what are your three rules, and what do you mean by breaking them down?
Well, the three rules are always disengage, disengage, disengage. And as we've spoken before, this is not just a repetition. This isn't just going, okay, disengage again. It's a sequencing to it that gives us a direction of what it really feels like to do this. So when we step in to the disengagement, we've been in a pattern of fighting, we've been in a pattern of arguing, we've been in a pattern of engaging in the fight, if you will.
Yep.
So when we stop it, when we take that first step of disengagement, we're coming into an awareness that we are doing something and we are going to stop doing it. And there's this metacognitive process of looking at what we're doing and how we're doing it and starting to develop a sequence, develop a strategy to stop the process. So the first piece of that is awareness.
Okay.
And what are we being aware of? Well, the first thing that we're aware of when we stop doing something in a pattern is there's some emotional distress. There is something that's happening in our body that is causing us physical distress. And what we want to start to do is become aware of what that looks like, what that feels like, because those become the indicators of how we start to unplug from it, how we start to create a container that brings us into being able to hold that. And all of this is the first step. So the emotional distress that we're looking at is there's a disorientation. We become disoriented to doing something differently. And when we stop, we look around, we start to feel that I'm not where I used to be in this. I'm doing something that is really different, and it doesn't look the same. My actions don't look the same. How I move in this doesn't feel the same. And sometimes that disorientation creates a lack of focus. There's a overwhelm to it, if you will, because the sensations that come with it are really high, right?
Yeah.
And while we're in this distress, there's this wanting to lash out. There's this patterning of lashing out. And there's chaotic thought where we're trying to find that one piece that can help us not go where we're trying to go.
Right. So there's a lot of resistance to temptation and habit there, right?
Exactly. And that resistance has the physical sensations that come along with it. And what we're trying to do here in this conversation is tie in that emotional distress to the physical correlates to it. You know, I'm emotionally distressed and my body is activated. I'm going into that fight flight sequence, and I'm trying in this first step of disengagement to override the sequence.
Okay.
And it's a white knuckle job to try to override that sequencing. So I'm activated and I feel my heart pumping. You know, my heart rate is up. I can feel my heart pounding. My muscles are pumped up. I want to make a movement. I'm in that flight or fight motion. And there's, you know, because of that primitive sequencing, there is some sense that I'm in danger. And there's that strong impulse, like you said, Charlie, to do something, anything, to relieve this distress.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the first piece that puts us into the conflict cycle, is that strong impulse to relieve this stress.
Yeah.
And we have become used to that cathartic release as being that dump of, okay, now I did something. Now I can relax. But there's the lack of the cognitive process that says, uh-oh, I just created a sequence. So that strong addictive pattern, that white knuckling, that hanging on to that thread is what we are trying to override. And then again, what we're trying to create to keep us in the container is to create a better container. So the habits that we're starting to develop in this first motion, in this first movement of disengagement, is the orientation to self, the orientation to our body, that place of breathing, noticing my breath and how shallow it may be or how quick it may be, and just consciously slowing it down.
Really just a mindfulness move, right?
It is a mindfulness move, and we're moving from reaction into mindfulness.
Like becoming aware.
Mm-hmm.
Because you really can't change anything that you're not aware of in the first place if you're completely reacting, right?
Right. Awareness.
Okay. And let me ask you a question. For practical purposes, before everybody's bad at things before they're good at them, for the most part, unless it's some sort of a natural gifting, what are some practical ways to assist with this? Are there some sort of rules or guidelines you can add? Like when you get a text and you feel your heart go up, don't respond for a day or something like that, right? I mean, what can you add that makes room to practice not being reactive?
Well, our first movement is the fourth rule, which we've talked about a little bit in the past, and it was kind of an addition onto the first three, which is don't just do something, sit there.
Yeah.
Tolerate the sensation. Just sit down and wait it out.
Yeah.
But while we're waiting it out, there's something going on in our body. Right. And what's going on in our body is that rapid breath, that rapid heartbeat, that loading up of the muscles to want to take some form of action.
Yeah.
And that just doing nothing is the waiting for that to subside. And that really, to your point, Charlie, is the beginning of the creation of the container that is going to hold this energy together. This notion that if I do nothing, that I create nothing. That if I do nothing, my nervous system is going to settle. And when my nervous system settles, then I'm in a different part of my brain. I'm able to do something totally different. But we don't trust that in the beginning. This is the nature of, habit. This is the nature of addiction. This is the nature of wanting to change how I feel because this is uncomfortable. And that container is the piece that allows us to begin to know that this exorbitant amount of sensation that's here is not going to destroy me.
Yeah.
That I can do this. And it's that sense of self. And if we bring this concept back a little bit to the idea of parts, thank you, Eric, then we are back into that sense of self being able to manage the parts that are in panic, the parts that are in distress, and being able to start to manage the system better, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you ask a little bit about what we can do. What are the things that we can stop and begin to do that will take us back into mindfulness, back into ourselves, back into how we slam on these brakes. And one of them is being connected with our breath, and the other is just simply orienting to the here and now. Now, I'm in a room. There's pictures in the room. There's plants in the room. My dog's in the room. I'm in the room. I can feel myself sitting in my chair. Because everything that we're reacting to, as we've talked about before, is a phantom in most cases. There's nothing to be done. There's something out there that I am trying to get ahead of that I don't know what it is.
Right.
And even if I do know what it is, there's a high likelihood that I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
And that orientation process, that orienting process, helps us tap of the brakes. It stops the impulse. It allows us to walk away. It allows us not to respond.
So awareness, I mean, mindfulness basically means awareness, right?
Right.
Awareness, the beginning steps, the baby steps of awareness are what you can practice with is name 10 things that are around you, right? Like,
Right.
Look at your environment. It sounds so basic. It sounds so like unhelpful in some ways, but my girlfriend works with special needs kids at a school, and one of their main techniques, and I think it's the same if you look at the dog whisperer, that guy Caesar, whatever his last name is, right? One of the main techniques is distraction, is like, get them focused on something else when they're starting to go off base, right? Or fall into a pattern of panic or something like that.
Right.
So the part of you that's going into a panic or going into fight or flight or going into attack, if you can learn with the other parts or with the self that controls all these parts, if you can learn to distract it. And one of the ways to distract it is just change the focus, right?
Right. And the distraction is away from the distraction.
Yeah.
The distraction is into reality. The distraction is into the moment.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I thought the same thing. It's like we're actually distracting ourselves back to reality, which is interesting.
Right.
Keep reorienting to reality. Wait, because we are constantly afraid of and fighting things that have not even happened. They're not even a part of reality. They're a story in our mind or one of the possible of the infinite futures, right?
Right.
And so if you use reality as your baseline, reality reminds me a little bit of the foundation of a home as we talk about it like this, right? This sort of, you don't think about the foundation of your home, but it's sort of holding the entire thing together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to reality as a base, like, hold on a second, what's real right now? I'm breathing in and out, I'm sitting down. I love, one of my teachers, I love when she says, there's only 3 things people do: stand up, sit down, or lay down horizontal, right? And if you're a billionaire or you just lost everything, you're still going to be standing up, sitting down, or laying down horizontally, right? So kind of orienting to like, where am I? What's going on? Coming back to reality is a distraction from the distraction.
Right. I remember a day when I was at a water park with my grandson years ago, and he was all over the map. He had some severe ADHD back in the day, and we were on this long line, and he was just going nuts. And I stopped him, and I just held him by the hand, and I said, "Hey, Hunter, look out over the field over there and tell me what you see." And he started with the big picture. There's a field. And I said, "What else do you see?" And we started to really come down into the detail of what was in the scenery, right down to bees pollinating flowers. And as we did that process, he got calmer and calmer and calmer, because that ADD, that ADHD is just a hyperactivation in the nervous system of something that he had no idea of what was going on as a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
But as we brought him into the moment, there was no activation other than, wow, all of these things are going on around me. Isn't that interesting? And it calmed him down. And this activation that's happening in the conflict with these people that are in this all of the time is nothing short of that.
And what Eric has taught us with this parts conversation is that was you and your grandson, but you can do that as self to one of your parts. You can take leadership of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talk to one of your parts and say, "Hey, bud, like, look out over the field. What do you see going on over there?" Right?
Yeah, right.
And what's so crazy is it almost sounds schizophrenic. It almost sounds like you're young and immature if you're talking to yourself. And the reality is that's probably the picture of maturity and responsibility and calmness is the person that understands, no, we're not just one part. And if you let your one most aggressive spastic part rule everything, no, you're like a child. You're like a dangerous child. But if you can wrangle those parts and have the mature one talk to the others and say, like, I honor what you're feeling, but can you step back for just a moment and let's reevaluate, right? There it is. Health.
Yep. This is self parenting the younger parts. This is me in my mature self parenting those younger parts that are disoriented to me and what's really here, right? It's coming back to self.
We haven't really talked about this. Maybe Eric has referenced it, but I'm assuming in this part's teaching, right, the judgment's not a part of it. You're not saying, oh my gosh, I've got a part of me that's like this and it shouldn't be. It's more just the embracing of reality. Like, man, I've got this part of me that's like a whiny little baby that wants to freak out when it doesn't get what it wants, or whatever it is, right? That's scared all the time, or afraid of abandonment when nothing's going, whatever it is, right? The idea is not to judge it and go, I should be like that, or I shouldn't, or I really need to change that. It's more, that dog's bark and I have that in me. Right? It's just reality.
Right. And from the internal family systems model that Eric refers to so often, the concept, the notion that all parts are welcome.
There you go.
Is what we really want to get to. It's like that piece is got some nasty distortion to it, and whatever it is, let's bring it up and let's welcome it into the conversation and see what it has to say, and not shame it or not push it back or not judge it, but just to be in relationship with it. So it knows that we are paying attention to it, that we care for it, and that we welcome it.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. And then, as we're building this container through this orientation to self and to the parts that are being activated in this, we're being aware of the beginning of settling and the want to go back to the engagement cycle. So when we feel ourselves starting to settle, oftentimes there's this impulse to go back into the fight, to go back into the activation. There's a strong draw to that negative energy of the fight. And just noticing that as we settle, that settling sometimes can be unsettling. And again, as we deepen into this routine of getting better and better at this first part, this first piece of the disengagement cycle, that we get better at just doing this, because we can't get to the second piece. We can't get to that second step until we've mastered this.
Yeah.
It's inherent in the progression that we can't do both. We have to get to one. We've got to finish one. We've got to master one before we can actually step into the next moment.
Okay.
And part of that is, again, this, and it happens to everybody. This isn't something that doesn't happen to each person that's going through this, because inherent in our nervous system, inherent in that fight-flight sequence is, it's dangerous out there. And if I'm not alert all the time, if I'm not in that hypervigilant state with what's going on, I'm going to miss something and I'm going to get slammed. So as we drop back down into that distorted thought of, if I relax, then I'm in trouble, that I can actually step into my relax, notice the uptick, and then come back to the other cycles about orienting and settling it back down. This seems kind of complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm just thinking the whole time, it's full when you live in the woods by yourself, right? the fight or flight kind of, I'm going to go into a panic because there's a lion right in front of me. That's like super useful and natural and good. It's a gift, We're just wrestling with the civilized world, where most of our interactions are either with other human beings, not dangerous animals, or even worse. I don't know if worse is the right rule, but even further away from the reality of where fight and flight comes from, we're reacting with thoughts. And stories,
Right.
interpretations.
It's a maladaptive response to something that inherently in our system is a survival mechanism. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So while we're going through this first piece, once we get back to the bottom, we rinse and repeat. We just keep doing this until we've got our chops down with it.
Right.
Right. And once we've got that, we're able to go to the next piece, right?
So step 2. What's step 2?
Well, step 2 is acceptance.
Okay.
Go back to awareness, acceptance, approval. And now we are in the acceptance stage. And the acceptance piece really starts with, yep, my life, this is my situation, and it's not going to change soon. And I have put together from step 1 what I need to help me through this. And within the acceptance piece of this, we've also accepted that our job in this is to do these first pieces, that it's my responsibility to control, to manage my own system. And inherent in that we're not going to change what the other parent does. We don't have the chops for that. We're not God. We're not in control of them. We're not in a place where we can move their attitudes, belief systems, whatever is driving them.
Yeah.
So we learn to relax into that. Accept it.
Right.
And, again, this image of going with the river, just flowing, just relaxing into the river, and knowing that the river is in charge of the current, and the river is going to take me where it takes me.
Yeah.
And it's going to wash me ashore when it's ready. And if I fight it, it's going to drown me.
Yeah. Is there, so much of my entrepreneurial training that I've taken has been on, like if you're self-employed or an entrepreneur or sort of a self-help type person in the United States, you end up in this thought process of how to create the life you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's cool. But the more I study now, that all sounds very controlling to me, right? Like I'm looking at reality going, it's not good enough and I need to change it, and coming up with very, very advanced strategies all the way up to like the movie The Secret or whatever. And those might be true, but is there something going on in the United States where some of what we're calling building a beautiful future or creating the life you want is actually fighting reality and trying to be God and be in control?
It's a good question.
We're all in charge of our own evolution, you've said, right?
Right.
But also, have we lost some of the trust for reality being good and life is happening for us, and we can kind of go with the river because it's going somewhere good?
Right. Well, I think the river's going where the river's going, and the dualistic thought of good and bad is where we get into trouble.
Yeah.
And the notion that, we have to have effort, we have to engage in our life, we have to take action in certain directions, is part of how we open the doors to what comes next. But what comes next, we don't know. There's ups, there's downs, there's crests, there's valleys. And when we watch what's, what is rather than what we think is good or bad, then everything levels out a little bit.
Right.
And this notion of we can't sit in our life and do nothing, right?
Yeah.
But when we take action, it's thought out action, and then we release it to go where it's going to go.
Yeah.
So I think that's more of the notion of just being in the flow of life.
Yeah, as you're talking about that in picture, like I love when you brought up the dualistic, because I say the river, trust the river's going where good, and you said the dualistic idea of good and bad is part of the issue. The river's going where it's going, right?
Right.
So how do you enjoy life? Let the river go where it goes, but lay back on the raft and look at the beautiful sky, right?
And enjoy the
Like
rapids.
enjoy the rapids, and then when it's calm, take a nap, right? And then
Right.
when you find a fishing pole and you're hungry, try to fish. But like the joy is found in not deciding where the river goes and saying what's good or bad, but seeing where it goes and being on it and being aware and being holding hands with the person next to you, perhaps, right?
And watching the scenery as it goes by.
Yeah, because it is
Being present for it.
beautiful. Like this is a beautiful place
Mhm.
that we live. It's amazing, and I don't know where it came from, right? It's just beautiful.
Right.
Awesome.
Nice imagery.
Yeah, really cool.
So again, back to this place of not being able to change, what the other parent does. They do what they do, and they're creating their own outcomes. They're creating their own pathway to wherever they're headed on their journey in the river, and it's not our job. It's our job to pay attention to ourselves. So setting the structure for our own stability, and the structure for our stability and that of our children is aiming at the future. That's not being stuck in the past, what somebody else has done or what's happened to us. It's like, what are we creating moving forward? Back to the idea of karma. And we're going to have some more conversations about this in podcasts to come soon as I'm creating those structures, aiming at the future, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But relationship with the kids, that's our structure. That's what we're heading to, and returning to that focus, returning to the focus on what we're doing and our relationship with our children frequently. Being big picture oriented, not getting down into the nuts and bolts of what we're stuck in terms of going to court or dealing with the attorneys or the battle that's going on with our other parent, but being in the big picture of this is what you and I were just talking about, being present for the flow of life and creating the pieces that we want to create headed into, again, the future.
Yeah.
And then going back and learning how to navigate step one as you move into acceptance. Part of this is tolerating the acting out of the other players. Tolerating, what does that mean? It means kind of accepting. This is what they're doing. They're acting out. They've got some beliefs that they've got to work through. And tolerating the sensation that comes with that.
Yeah.
And then learning how to pendulate between the dualistic thinking of blame and victimhood and personal power and potency. We're going to go back into those other places. We're going to slip into the dualistic thinking of blame and victimhood. It's inherent in who we are as human beings. But again, being aware of that, accepting that that's part of where we're going to go, and having the tools to pendulate back into our personal power and potency.
Yeah.
Which comes out of, by the way, mastering step one.
Yeah.
That's where it all starts. That's kind of where it all coalesces. Because again, if we don't get that one nailed, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. Again, staying oriented to the unfolding and not staying stuck in the past.
Right.
Which leads us to disengage step 3. And this is the one where we all get caught up. This is the one that becomes difficult. This is the one that I'm kind of coming back to, where when we had an earlier discussion about awareness, acceptance, perspective, was an adaptation on awareness, acceptance, approval. And I'm coming back to approval.
Mm-hmm.
The perspective is one way to look at it, but the approval, I kind of want to stay with. And in my conversations with Eric, we keep trying to tweak this one. I've had conversations with him over the years about disengage, and him wanting to pull me off and take me into some other component of that. And it always comes back to disengage. So here I'm coming back to awareness, acceptance, approval.
Mm-hmm.
And we look at that, we go, approval of what? Well, approval of what is, coming out of that dualistic concept of good and bad, and finding gratitude and value in the opportunity for the understanding that's put in front of us, and leaning strongly into, this is good for me. This is my opportunity for personal growth.
Yeah.
And being in gratitude that other person is offering me this opportunity to do this. Orienting to the nature of how we all are on some level stuck in our distortions.
Right.
We're all stuck in our distortions. And they're in theirs and I'm in mine, and this is our river. This is where we're flowing. And to be aware of the surroundings of our own distortion, and to try to come out of that into what is really below it and that's driving us.
Yeah.
Focusing on waking up to our own distortions and seeing how we can change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what we're trying to change is that generational progression of the epigenetic expression of behavior for ourselves and for our children. This is what we're trying to change. And this is being an approval of having that deep opportunity to change our genetic makeup, to change our DNA, to move into something that is deeper and greater than anything that we could have possibly had an opportunity to do had we not had this.
Right.
And this means getting out of blame and taking responsibility for creating the change.
So without being dualistic and saying like, this is good for me, what language do you use? You say this is health, or this is downriver, instead of fighting, you know what I'm saying? Because I keep wanting to think, well, embrace that this life is good and that this is good for you, right? But that's sort of dualistic language.
Right. So I've told this story before, but I'll bring it back since we're using the river analogy again.
Mm-hmm.
My girlfriend tells a story of being on a rafting trip and of getting pitched out of the raft in the rapids and feeling like she was going to die, feeling like she was going to drown, and coming into awareness of that. And her being a deeply spiritual person and believing in reincarnation, going, I don't want to come back, being in panic of death. And she had that thought while she's being beat against the rocks and coming through the rapids. And she said, instead, I'm going to pretend this is an e-ticket at Disneyland and I'm going to have some fun. And if it kills me, it kills me. But if it doesn't, woohoo. And she relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And the rapids spit her out. And she was bruised and banged around, but she was alive. And that is being an approval, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is where I'm at. Let's have some fun. And that doesn't mean that there wasn't pain and there wasn't a lot of sensation.
Right.
But it was embracing of it, of not being in resistance to it.
Right. And there are some sports where pain is a very big part of it. And the person participating, like, pain doesn't mean non-enjoyment, right? It would be, you'd have to be resistant to the pain and judge it and go, it shouldn't be this way. Like when you say she relaxed and ended up with some bruises and stuff, but she's like, this is an amazing ride, right?
Right.
Huh. Nice.
So I hope everybody's enjoyed this one. And this is not a podcast to listen to once. This is a podcast to listen to over and over, because the 3 rules are not just disengage, disengage, disengage. And oftentimes when I talk to people that have listened to my podcasts, that have taken the classes, that have gone through the program, they're just kind of in this, oh yeah, disengage, disengage, disengage. And no, it's not just that.
I don't even think I really realized is like disengage, disengage, disengage lines up with these 3 other things I've heard you say over time, right?
Right.
Which is, well, let's go back and look at awareness, acceptance, approval. So I thought of disengage, disengage, disengage as like you're just reiterating it because it's very important, right?
Right.
But you're actually talking about stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or like basic disengagement, medium, and then advanced level, right? It's a progression. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, I hope everybody really enjoys this. We're going to come back next week. We're going to be in our next episode 56. We're going to talk about the notion that what they do means nothing, and what you do means everything.
Awesome.
Until next week. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Brook. All right, everybody, this has been episode 55, breaking down the sequence of the 3 rules: disengage, disengage, disengage. It's not just a reiteration. It's actually a process: awareness, acceptance, and approval. And so listen to this one over and over and over again until you get it, and then live some of your life, and then you'll probably have to listen again. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.